of you either write the words wrinkles, villi, and microvilli. And a large number of you actually drew the picture that we drew in class of your wavy intestine with villi all over it, and then microvilli on the outside of those. That would be the things that we were looking for. So it is highly likely that I will ask you to explain something about your small intestine and its surface on the quest that we do next Wednesday. Now, two kind of piggybacks on question number one. I'm asking, why does absorption take place in your small intestine? Now, obviously, the number one answer is because of the surface area that's available. But since we already answered that, we have to think about, what does absorption mean? And absorption means whatever you eat is getting into your bloodstream. And so we want to focus on, how is it possible that all this food is getting into your bloodstream? And you might recall that I mentioned on this picture, there are blood vessels running up inside of every single villus. And because the villi are so close to the blood vessels, it is easy for materials to be transported from your digestive tract into your blood. Now for number three, the word chemical should make you think of enzymes. We're looking for, where do enzymes that digest carbohydrates come from? And when we made our chart yesterday, I suggested to you that it might be worth your while to think about a carbohydrate and where are all the places that a carbohydrate is digested. And then the same thing for proteins and the same thing for fats. So I would think of salivary glands. Why? Because they produce saliva that contains salivary amylase. So that would be one of them. I would think about my pancreas. That's where the other amylase is coming from. And I would think about my small intestine, actually for two reasons. Reason one, the pancreas doesn't let food enter. So the pancreas's contribution is only noticed when you get to the small intestine, and amylase can mix with your food. But the secondary reason for the small intestine is it is making its own enzymes, maltase, sucrase, and lactase. So if I think about the enzymes, there are 5 enzymes that we discussed that contribute to breaking down a carbohydrate, and those are the 3 places that they come from. 1 from the salivary glands, 1 from the pancreas, and 3 from the small intestine. Now for question number 4, there is more than one answer that is correct. The thing I want you to key in on is that I said the meal was very fatty. So would anyone like to suggest an organ that has to do with digesting fats? And there's more than one thing that's correct here. I'm going to ask you guys because you all had a different answer and I said you were all right. So Morgan, what did you say? She said liver, which I agree with. And then Aurora, you said pancreas. Both of them are correct. Did anyone say anything besides liver or pancreas? Anyone say gallbladder? Yeah, there we got some gallbladders. That would definitely be one. Now I could even see to a small degree stomach being the answer. The reason all of those things are on the list is because they have to do with either bile or lipase. So your liver produces the bile, your gallbladder stores the bile. Both of those are required for physical digestion of fats. Your pancreas and your stomach both produce lipase. That's an enzyme that helps break down fats. So any of those 4 organs could be a legitimate answer to this question, as long as you explain what their link is to fat. And so you'll see on the quest that we do next week, there will be a number of questions where there's actually more than one thing that's correct, as long as you explain why you're choosing it. Now lastly, it's 2:15, it feels like lunch was forever ago, you are hungry. Which hormone? Insulin is the hormone that gets produced right away when you just ate a bunch of food. Lunch was forever ago and I'm very hungry. Glucagon is the one that gets produced when you are hungry, when your blood sugar is lower. So I always think to myself, glucagon kind of sounds like glucose. And so if I'm hungry, if I need something, I need the one that's going to give me more glucose in my bloodstream. What does glucagon do? It does the opposite of what insulin does. Insulin increases permeability of your cells, so glucagon decreases. That means glucose is not going to go into your cells, it's going to stay in your bloodstream. The other thing that it will do is help convert glycogen to glucose. So instead of storing glucose, we're going to put it back in its usable form. So we're talking about how digestive secretions are controlled. First things first, we're talking about enzymes most of the time. And I'm just going to put a little star because I'm including bile in this list, even though it's not an enzyme, but because it's a fluid that's produced by your digestive system, I like to talk about it with all of the other secretions. Now they all come from special cells. They're all coming from some gland. It could be your salivary gland or a gastric gland, the glands in between, the villi in your intestine, your pancreas, which is a gland, or bile, which is coming from your liver. Now the key thing is that enzymes are not continuously produced. They're produced only when they are stimulated by the proper substance or by the proper signal. And this is good. You don't want your body producing an enzyme to digest carbohydrates if you are not eating any carbohydrates. You want your body to respond to what's happening. So I'm going to write this word. Good old homeostasis. The fact that your body responds to what you are eating and produces enzymes accordingly is an example of homeostasis. It's only producing enough to match what you have eaten. And so anything that involves your body responding to the environment or responding to some stimulus, that's homeostasis happening. So this entire lesson could all be an example of homeostasis because your body responds to what you have eaten and produces things accordingly. Now there's 3 ways in general that enzymes are stimulated. It could be because of a hormone. Hormones are things that go in your blood and travel to cells. It could be because of nerve impulses, so something coming from your brain. It could be because of peristalsis, so that's your smooth muscles contracting. Or it could be more than one of these or all 3 of them put together. So either something in your blood or something from your brain or the contraction of muscles in your digestive system will signal, hey, it's time to produce an enzyme. So the first thing I'm showing you is actually the summary. So if you wanted, like what should I study on my study card, this sums up how everything is stimulated. Your saliva is mostly controlled by your nervous system. That means that if you see food, if you smell food, if you hear noises that sound like food being prepared, or you think about delicious food, saliva shows up in your mouth. So try it right now. I'm going to think about dill pickle potato chips. Oh yeah, there we go. There's saliva in my mouth already just thinking about them. I know that there are some sights and some smells that would make you think about delicious food. So as you're driving by a restaurant, perhaps you smell a nice aroma and it makes you think about food, and then you start producing saliva. There are even examples where a particular sound can make saliva be produced. There's a fairly famous set of experiments called Pavlov's dogs. And it was an experiment in psychology, but the idea was that the psychologist would ring a bell and feed a dog, and after a while, simply ringing the bell caused the dog to produce saliva because it expected food to come along with that sound. And so saliva is mostly under nervous system control. Now, gastric juice is under nervous control as well, but by a different means. I'll show you on the next page when I show gastric juice in a bit of detail. There is a huge nerve, the vagus nerve, that runs all the way from your brain down to your stomach. It's one of the longest nerves that you have. And so there are automatic signals sent from your brain to your stomach to start producing substances. We'll talk about a hormone, and I'll mention that peristalsis happens there. So when smooth muscles contract in your digestive system, in particular in your stomach and your esophagus, that's sending signals that food is on its way, and your brain responds by telling your gastric glands to produce things. Now, your intestinal juice is more or less 100% stimulated by peristalsis. That means that if food is in your intestines and smooth muscles are contracting, your intestinal enzymes will be produced. Your pancreas and bile are mostly controlled by hormones. So that means that a signal needs to be produced, sent into your blood, and then sent around to the pancreas and to the gallbladder or the liver. So what we'll do is just give a little bit more details, in particular on the hormones that are involved and on that long nerve I mentioned for the gastric juice. So we'll talk about gastric juice. I'm summing up the three things that you just wrote down. So gastric juice, of course, is based on peristalsis of the muscles of your stomach. Now, when you think about food, not only does it make saliva start being produced in your mouth, but you get a nerve impulse sent all the way to your stomach by this big long nerve called the vagus nerve. And I've got a picture here illustrating where the vagus nerve is and what it does. It's a really, really long nerve. It starts in the bottom of your brain. If you take Bio20E, there's an entire chapter just about brain, but the bottom part of your brain is where automatic things are controlled. So you have this cool structure called the medulla oblongata. It's the base of your brain. We call it the brain stem because it looks like the brain is a flower on this stem of tissue. But this is where most of the automatic signals are coming from. And this vagus nerve, if you can see, goes to a whole bunch of places. It stimulates bile. It stimulates peristalsis in your stomach. It stimulates your lungs. It stimulates your heart. So your vagus nerve controls a whole bunch of automatic functions, and it's coming from the base of your brain towards all of these organs to give them signals. Now, when peristalsis happens in your stomach, we get gastrin. We already mentioned it when we talked about what a gastric gland is, but gastrin is a substance produced in the gastric gland. It goes into your blood, and it stimulates the production and release of gastric juice. Things like acid and pepsin, for example, are part of your gastric juice. So gastrin sounds like stomach because it has gast at the beginning. Gastrin stimulates your stomach to produce all of the substances that come out of a gastric gland. So that's for your stomach. Peristalsis, vagus nerve, and gastrin. Now, there were two other organs that had hormonal control, and that's what we'll talk about next. So this is the last slide that we'll talk about today. First, we'll mention pancreatic juice and how that's stimulated. So, first of all, food has to enter the first part of your small intestine, the duodenum. And because it has a low pH, This stimulates hormones from your small intestine. So food comes in, the fact that the pH is really low because it just came from your stomach is the signal that these hormones need to be produced. We get two hormones, secretin and pancreozymin. Now these two hormones are going to have an effect on your pancreas. Secretin, that starts with an S, causes the release of sodium bicarbonate, which also starts with an S. Pancreozymin stimulates the production of enzymes, and they have that same little ZYM part in the name. So that might be an association that you want to make. I know that's how I always remember that pancreozymin is for the enzymes. So when I'm talking about pancreatic enzymes, we would be discussing things like amylase, trypsin, and lipase. So there's two hormones for your pancreas. Secretin for sodium bicarbonate, that's the base that will help neutralize the stomach acid, and pancreozymin for the enzymes. Now, are these the only hormones in the universe? No. If you read in your textbook, there's a bunch of other ones. I'm picking and choosing so that we get a big picture idea without being focused on every single detail that's possible. Now, the last thing on my list is the control of bile. Same thing that happens with your pancreas. Food has to enter your small intestine. Specifically here, fatty food needs to enter the first part of your small intestine. Another hormone is produced. Its official name is cholecystokinin, but you can call it CCK, and I will too. Now, what does this hormone do? It makes your gallbladder contract. And that is what causes bile to be produced, to be released, goes through that common bile duct and into the first part of your small intestine. So if, for example, you have your gallbladder removed, CCK doesn't have anything to act on. And so that's why having your gallbladder removed would make it more difficult to digest fats. Not impossible, because your liver can still produce bile and respond to this, but it's just harder.